When the ruthless vampire lord noticed the hidden marks on his quiet maid, that night he asked for blood for the first time, not for himself, but for someone weaker than him. The one who had dared to lay a hand on her met an end, so terrifying that his screams echoed against the castle walls and became a tale whispered for centuries. From that day on, every tyrant knew this truth. In this palace, fear does not come only from the darkness, but also from the silent protection the vampire lord gives to those he calls his own. Most people only remember the blood and the fear when they talk about vampire lords. But the night he saw the bruises on his maid's skin, the darkest creature in the kingdom did something more human than anyone expected. The castle of Lord Kale was a place of whispers and candlelight, where even the stone floors seemed to hold their breath when he walked by. Servants moved like shadows, careful not to meet his eyes, careful not to spill a single drop of wine near the man who had once spilled rivers of blood to claim this mountain fortress. Outside, villagers told stories of his fangs and his fury. Inside, they told none at all. Silence was safer. Only one voice ever broke that silence without trembling. It belonged to a young maid named Leora. Her steps were light, her hands steady, and when she bowed, there was a hint of stubborn dignity in the way she held her chin. Cale noticed that from the first night she entered his service. He noticed everything, the way she refilled his goblet without flinching at the smell of iron on his breath, the way she looked out at the misty valley as if somewhere far beyond the fog she still believed in morning. For a long time he watched her the way predators watch fire, curious, cautious, unwilling to get too close. He was a king and a monster, feared by nobles and thieves alike, yet something in that girl's quiet courage made him hesitate before raising his voice, made him soften it when he did. He told himself it was nothing, a distraction, a flicker of light in an eternity of dark halls and heavier crowns. Then, one winter evening, the light in her eyes dimmed. Cale was seated in his great hall, the air thick with the scent of cold stone and melted wax. Flames from the tall candelabras painted gold across his crimson cloak. He did not need them to see, his kind could read every grain of dust in the dark. But fire made his servants feel a little safer, and lately he found he did not mind that. Leora approached to pour his drink, her steps a fraction slower than usual, her shoulders drawn in close as if she was trying to disappear into herself. Kale's senses picked up the wrongness instantly, the soft hitch in her breath when she lifted the heavy crystal, the tiny flinch when the sleeve of her simple blue dress brushed against her own arm. No one else would have noticed, but he was not no one else. His gaze dropped not to the goblet but to the fragile wrist that held it. Just beneath the lace cuff where the firelight reached, he saw it, a shadow that was not shadow at all, a dark, ugly bloom staining her pale skin. Bruises. Something primal stirred in him, old as his curse and twice as cold. It was not hunger, it was not even anger, not at first. It was a sudden, sharp awareness that this girl, this piece of quiet sunlight that had somehow survived in his night, had been hurt. Not by fate, not by accident, by a hand, a choice, a person. Leora realized where he was looking. In an instant she straightened, tugging her sleeve down so fast the lace trembled. Color rushed to her cheeks, not the healthy warmth of life, but the hot flush of shame. She took a small step back, the wine bottle clinking softly against the side of the goblet. "Forgive me, my lord," she whispered, eyes fixed on the floor. "I did not mean to offend." There it was again, that strange, bright human habit of blaming oneself for wounds given by others. It twisted something in his chest he hadn't felt in decades. He leaned back in his chair, forcing stillness into his limbs, because when he moved too quickly, mortals remembered why they feared him. "You have not offended me," Cale said quietly. His voice, when he chose, could be gentle as velvet. "You are hurt." "It is nothing," she answered too quickly, the words cracked. "I was clumsy, my lord, I fell." He could taste the lie the way he tasted fear in the air. The scent around her now was not fear of him, not exactly. It was fear of a question, fear of a name, fear of what would happen if the truth stepped out of the dark. Cale studied her for a long moment. The hall around them faded, the distant crackle of the fire, the rustle of tapestries in the draught. Even the other servants seemed to vanish into the stone. There was only the girl and the bruise she tried to hide from the one creature in this castle who saw everything. Leora, he said, and it startled her that he used her name. He almost never used names. Look at me. She hesitated, then obeyed. Her eyes were red-rimmed, as if sleep had been a stranger for many nights. Beneath the dusting of freckles on her cheek, he could see another faint shadow half hidden under a stray lock of hair. His jaw tightened. Gently, slower than he had moved in a century, he rose from his throne. The long crimson cloak slid from the armrest and whispered against the floor. Leora's breathing quickened, but she did not retreat. Some small part of her still trusted him, or perhaps simply had nowhere else to go. He stopped a step away from her, close enough to see the tremble in her fingers, far enough that his presence would not feel like a cage. "Show me," he said softly. Her throat worked. "Please, my lord, it is not." "Show me," he repeated, but there was no command in it, only something quieter. A request, a promise she could not yet hear. The hall was so still that one of the candles cracked, a tiny pop of cooling wax, and both of them flinched. Leora swallowed, eyes shining with something dangerously close to tears. With stiff, reluctant hands, she pushed back the sleeve of her dress. The marks were worse than he expected. Dark bands circling her wrist as if someone had used their fingers like iron. A fading bruise blooming along her forearm where force had met fragile bone. No blood, no broken skin. But he knew these patterns too well. He had seen them once on villagers dragged by soldiers long ago, before he had claimed this mountain and promised no warlord would cross his lands without paying a price. His own hands, pale as carved marble, curled slowly into fists. For a flicker of a moment, the beast inside him stirred fully awake, whispering of punishment and terror, of making whoever did this feel their own bones shake with dread. But when he spoke, his voice was low and steady. "This," he said, eyes on the bruises, "is not from a fall." A tear slipped free and traced a thin line down Leora's cheek. She did not bother to wipe it away. Her shoulders sagged under the weight of a secret carried too long. "It does not matter," she whispered. "It will stop, I just have to be more careful, I make too many mistakes." The words cut him more cleanly than any blade ever had. The mighty Lord Kale, who had faced armies and outlived empires, found himself at a loss in front of a single broken sentence from a human girl. He took a breath he did not need. Then, slowly, he did something that would have stunned every noble in the land. He bent one knee, lowering himself so that his eyes were level with hers. "You are not the mistake," he said. "Someone chose to hurt you, that is the only wrong thing here." Leora stared at him as if the idea itself was too wild to believe. In all her life, perhaps no one had said it so plainly. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of all the times she had blamed herself, full of every night she had told herself to endure a little longer. Finally, in a voice almost too small to hear, she asked, "And if I tell you, what then, my lord?" For a heartbeat, Kale saw a memory that was not his own. A young woman centuries ago, alone in a burning village, reaching out for help that never came. His failure, his greatest shame, the reason he had sworn never again to turn away from a cry, even an unspoken one. He met Leora's gaze, and in his crimson eyes there was no hunger now, only an ancient, quiet storm. "Then," he said, every word a vow, "whoever did this to you will never touch you again." She looked at his face, searching it for cruelty, for a trap, for the monster she had been warned about. Instead, she found something that terrified her in a different way, the possibility that this promise might be real. Her lips trembled. She leaned in, just enough that no one else in the world could have heard her. Her next words were a broken breath against the darkness between them. "It was." She spoke a single name. And as the sound of it reached him, the vampire lord's eyes changed, growing colder than the stone beneath his feet, brighter than the flames around them, holding a storm so fierce that even the shadows in the great hall seemed to recoil. And in that suspended heartbeat, before anyone could guess what he would do next, the entire castle's fate shifted, waiting on his next move. The name left Leora's lips like a secret she had been strangling for years, and when it finally escaped, the silence that followed felt heavier than stone. Lord Kale had heard countless names in his long life, kings, warlords, traitors, but this one slid into his ears like a blade. Darren, the castle steward, the man Cale had trusted to manage the human staff with a calm, reasonable hand. The one who had bowed so low his forehead nearly touched the floor, who had spoken of order and discipline, and the dignity of serving a great house with a smooth voice and a neatly pressed smile. Now, hearing his name carried on Leora's shaking breath, Cale realized how little a bow and a smile were worth. He stayed kneeling in front of her for a moment longer, letting his fury cool just enough that it would not frighten her more than she already was. To a human, it would have looked like stillness. Inside him, the beast clawed at its own cage, outraged that anyone would dare harm what it had quietly chosen to protect. "How long?" he asked. Leora's eyes flickered toward the wide doors of the hall, half expecting the steward to stride in and drag her away just for speaking. No one came. The candles hissed softly in their pools of melted wax. Somewhere in the rafters, an unseen bird shifted, and a tiny scatter of dust drifted down through the air. "A while," she whispered, since he was given charge of us. At first it was only words, then if I was too slow or spoke back or looked at him wrong." Her hand went unconsciously to her bruised wrist. "He says he is teaching me respect. He says I owe him my place here." Most people talked about monsters as if they lived only in crypts and dark forests. Listening to her, Cale remembered why he distrusted humans far more than they feared him. He rose slowly and offered his hand to her. The gesture felt strange. He was used to people kneeling to him, not the other way around. Leora hesitated, then let him help her up. His hand was cool but steady, and for the first time that night her breathing eased by a fraction. "Walk with me," he said. They left the great hall together. The servants scattered out of their path, eyes dropping at once, because they had never seen their lord leave his throne for a maid and they did not know what it meant. Their footsteps echoed along the corridor, Leora's soft and hesitant, Cale's measured and soundless despite the heavy boots and cloak. He led her not to the dungeons, not to some terrible hidden room, but to a small chamber off the old library. The walls there were lined with shelves sagging under the weight of forgotten books, the air warmer from a low-burning fire. This room had once belonged to a human tutor who had tried to teach Cale's first mortal advisors to read contracts properly. The man had been long dead, but the space still held a sense of patient quiet. Cale gestured to a cushioned bench by the fire. "Sit." She sat on the edge, back straight like someone braced for scolding. He could see she did not quite know what to do with her hands now that she was not holding a tray or a broom, so she laced them tightly in her lap, fingers white at the knuckles. Without a word, Cale took a folded blanket from the arm of a chair and set it around her shoulders. Leora's eyes widened at the small kindness, as if it startled her more than shouting would have. "You are safe in this room," he said quietly. "No one enters here without my leave. No one touches you here." For someone who had been taught her whole life that the monster in the castle was her greatest danger, the idea that he could also be her shelter took time to sink in. She nodded, but the doubt in her eyes was old and deep. "Tell me," he said, "all of it, as much as you can." So she did, halting at first, then in a rush that sounded like a dam finally cracking. She told him how Darren had praised her for being diligent, then used that praise to keep her late after others had gone. How his hand had first guided her with a little more force than needed, how his temper had worsened when she did not respond with the fear he wanted to see. She told him about small punishments no one questioned, extra duties, meals withheld, harsh words in corners where no one else could hear. Cale listened without interrupting, every detail folding into his mind like pieces of a puzzle he wished he did not have to solve. He did not ask for the ugliest descriptions. He could see enough in the bruises on her skin and in the careful way she avoided talking about certain nights. His kind did not need to see blood to know that harm had been done. "You tried to tell someone?" he asked when she paused, eyes fixed on the fire. She gave a broken laugh, short and bitter. "Who, my lord? He is the steward. He hires and releases us. He decides whose family gets extra bread in winter. When one girl complained she was sent back to her village, no letter of reference, no wages saved, her family now begs at the south gate." Her throat tightened. He told me he could do the same with my mother. He knows she is ill. He knows she needs the medicine you pay for. There it was, the chain, not made of iron, but of hunger and fear and love twisted into a threat. Kale had seen warlords use that same chain on whole villages. He had killed some of them for it. Yet here in his own home, under his own name, someone had quietly forged another. The realization settled on his shoulders, heavier than the centuries. "This is my failing," he said, more to himself than to her. Leora shook her head at once. "No, my lord, please, you must not think." But Kale lifted a hand and she fell silent. There was no anger in the gesture, only a kind of weary certainty. "I put him in charge," he said. "I told myself humans should manage humans. I believed that fear of me would be enough to keep order. I did not look closely enough at the cost of my distance." He turned his gaze back to her. "That ends now." Her lips parted. This was the moment some part of her had been dreading. "You mean you will kill him?" Her voice cracked around the word. "Because of me." Kale studied her. Most rulers faced with such an insult would have taken pleasure in the thought. Once, long ago, he might have as well. But what he saw now was not an excuse for rage. It was an opportunity to be something different from the monster they had written into their stories. "What do you fear more?" he asked gently. "His punishment or that nothing will change?" She swallowed hard, unable to answer at first. If you have ever lived with someone who hurt you, you know that tangled feeling, fearing their cruelty, fearing their absence, fearing what your truth might unleash. "I don't want more blood because of me," Leora whispered at last. "I just want him to stop, to leave me alone, to leave all of us alone." Her words landed on him with unexpected weight. She was not asking for revenge, not like the villagers who had once begged him to burn an enemy's fields or level a rival's fortress. Leora, bruised and exhausted, was asking for something quieter and far more difficult, an end without more ruin. Mikhail let out a breath. "If I promise you that I will not spill blood in anger, will you trust me enough to let me act?" She blinked, confused. "You would promise that? You are a vampire lord." "I am also a king," he replied, "and a king who cannot keep his own house just is a poor excuse for power." A faint, wry twist touched his mouth, there and gone. "Besides, I have seen enough death. I do not need more to feel powerful." He extended his hand again, not as a ruler, but almost as an equal. "Leora, let me carry this weight. You have carried it alone long enough." Her eyes filled, but this time the tears were not only from fear. Slowly, as if reaching across a cliff edge, she placed her hand in his. It was a small, shaking thing, warm and human and impossibly fragile against the cold certainty of his grip. "I will trust you," she said. Kale nodded once, as if sealing a contract older than the laws carved into the castle's stone. He rose and moved to the door. Before opening it, he glanced back at her. "You will stay here tonight," he told her. "I will have food brought. You will sleep without listening for footsteps in the corridor. If anyone tries this door, they will not live to try another." He paused, then softened his tone. "But no one will, not tonight." He signaled to a guard outside, a broad-shouldered man with eyes that never left his lord's face. "Stand here," Kale ordered. "No one enters until I return, especially the steward. If he demands, you will say I commanded it." The guard frowned slightly. He had served long enough to know what it meant when Kale's voice went that quiet. "Yes, my lord." Kale stepped back into the corridor. As the door closed, he caught one last glimpse of Leora by the fire, small beneath the blanket but no longer quite as alone as she had been at sunset. The castle's night swallowed him in its familiar shadows as he walked. Torches guttered along the stone walls. A draught slithered through the tapestries. He could hear everything, the murmur of servants cleaning the last dishes in the kitchens, the clank of armor as guards changed posts, the soft, strained heartbeat of Darren somewhere above in his private chambers. Each step brought memories with it. The first time he had hired the steward, how Darren had spoken of efficiency and loyalty. The times Kale had seen a servant flinch and had dismissed it as simple fear of him, not realizing there might be another source. Every small sign he had ignored now burned in his mind like embers. Outside Darren's door, he stopped. For a moment, he rested his hand on the carved wood, feeling the life beating faintly beyond it. The beast inside him wanted to break the door from its hinges, to drag the man out by his collar, to let centuries of fury speak in the only way it knew. Instead, Kale slowly closed his fingers, withdrew his hand, and knocked once. The sound was so polite, so controlled, that it made the hairs rise on the back of his own neck. "Enter," came Darren's voice, smooth and unsuspecting. Kale opened the door and stepped into the steward's chamber. It was neat, ordered, every book in its place, every ledger aligned. A fire crackled in the grate, throwing golden light over the man who had built his power not with fangs, but with smiles and ink. Darren looked up, startled to see his lord at his door this late. Surprise flashed in his eyes, then quickly rearranged itself into careful concern. "My lord," he said, rising at once, "is something amiss? Has one of the servants displeased you? I have told them many times." Kale shut the door behind him with a quiet click. In the heavy stillness that followed, he took one step forward, crimson cloak whispering across the floor, his eyes never leaving the man who had laid hands on his maid. "Sit," the vampire lord said, his voice calm as deep water. "We need to speak about the way you keep my house." Darren hesitated, reading something in Kale's expression that wiped the false warmth from his face. Outside, unseen, a draft swept down the corridor and blew out a single candle, plunging that stretch of stone into darkness, as if the castle itself were holding its breath for what would come next. Darren sat slowly, the legs of his chair scraping against the stone with an uneasy sound that did not match his forced smile. The fire in his chamber burned bright, but the room felt strangely cold now, as if the warmth had been pushed back to the corners, leaving only a thin circle of light around the two men. "My lord," he began, smoothing his dark sleeves with careful fingers, "if there has been some trouble with the servants, I assure you I have everything under control. They are simple people. They need firm guidance or they grow lazy, ungrateful." Kale did not move closer. He simply stood there, tall and terribly still, his crimson cloak catching the firelight, his pale eyes fixed on the steward's face as if he were reading a book he had already memorized. "Tell me," Kale said softly, "what you call firm guidance." Darren swallowed, the line of his throat bobbing. "Discipline, my lord," a raised voice, a sharp word, perhaps a grip on the arm when someone refuses to listen. "Nothing more. I would never dare do anything that would displease you." Kale listened, but he was not only hearing the words. He was listening to the heartbeat stuttering under them, to the way Darren's gaze slipped away when he spoke of nothing more. He had spent centuries judging men who lied to save their lives. This was not new to him. "You have never raised your hand in anger," Kale asked quietly. "Never left bruises on those who serve me." A flicker crossed Darren's features, too small for most eyes but not for Kale S. His shoulders tensed just slightly. His fingers tightened on the chair's arms. "Of course not, my lord," Darren said quickly. "If anyone has told you such things, they are mistaken. These girls are dramatic. They exaggerate to avoid responsibility." Kale's face did not change, but the air around him did. The fire popped sharply in the grate as if it too objected to the lie. "Leora," Kale said, letting the name fall into the room like a stone into still water. Darren's composure flickered. For half a second, his polite smile vanished, and in its place something harder, irritated, almost disgusted showed through. Then the mask snapped back into place. "My lord, if this is about Leora," he said, voice turning smooth again, "you must understand she is a difficult girl. Stubborn, she misunderstands authority as cruelty. She trips over her own feet and then blames my training for her bruises. I have tolerated her out of respect for your fondness for her service, but if she is now inventing tales." Mikhail took one step forward. It was a small movement, but the temperature in the room seemed to drop with it. Shadows gathered around his shoulders. The calm in his eyes did not break, but it changed. It became the calm of deep water that could drown you without a single ripple. "I saw the marks on her skin," he said, each word a quiet weight. "I heard the way she spoke your name. That is not invention, that is fear." For the first time, Darren's mask cracked wide enough that even a human would have seen it. Fear, he barked, a trace of panic sneaking into his tone. Of me, I have only ever done what you refuse to do. I keep order, I make them obedient. They are safer being afraid of me than of you. Well, the last sentence slipped out before he could catch it. Kale's eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in something worse, understanding. So you built your power out of borrowed terror, he murmured. You hid behind my name and thought that made you untouchable. Darren realized his mistake and jumped to his feet. My lord, you must see if they do not fear someone, they grow bold. Ungrateful, that girl should be thanking me. I have given her a place here, food, a bed. Kale's voice cut through his excuses like a blade through silk. You have given her nothing, he said. I did, and I did not give it so you could use my charity as chains. The beast inside him pressed against its bars, burning for an outlet. Images flashed in his mind, old nights when he did not bother to stop his rage, when he had taught men lessons with teeth and shadow and terror. It would be so easy to let that part of him take over, to end this with a single brutal act. He remembered Leora's face when she said, I don't want more blood because of me. His hands, which had started to curl into fists, slowly loosened. In another part of the castle, Leora sat by the small library fire with the blanket still around her shoulders, staring into the flames as they danced and sank. The food a servant had brought lay half-touched on the tray beside her. Every creak of the old wood, every gust of wind in the chimney made her head lift, her heart leap. She imagined the conversation happening somewhere above, in rooms she had only ever passed with her eyes on the floor. She pictured Darren's smile, that cold little curve of his mouth that never reached his eyes. Her stomach tightened with guilt. What if he dies because of me? What if they say I destroyed a man's life? She thought of her mother, coughing in their tiny cottage in the village below, the medicine that arrived each month in a small glass vial stamped with the Lord's seal. If Darren was gone, would the help stop? Would the village blame her? Would the other servants turn their backs on the girl who had made trouble? The door rattled softly behind her as the guard shifted his weight. He cleared his throat. My lady, he stopped, perhaps realizing he had never called a servant that before. Leora, he will not harm you again. Lords made that clear. As she turned her head slightly, you heard. The guard looked at the floor, embarrassed. Only that the steward S been summoned and that our lord looked indifferent. He hesitated, searching for words. I have seen him angry in battle. This was not that. This was colder, quieter. I would not want to be standing where Darren stands tonight. Leora looked back at the fire. I didn't want anyone to stand there at all, she said. I just wanted it to stop. That is enough, the guard said, more firmly than before. Wanting it to stop is enough. She let the words settle in her chest, fragile but real. Maybe courage was not just surviving. Maybe it was speaking once, even when your whole body told you to keep silent. Maybe it was trusting that someone else could carry the part of the fight you could not. Upstairs, Kale circled slowly around Darren's chair, not like a predator now, but like a judge examining a scene. You say you care for order, Kale said. Yet you hide your discipline in shadows. If you believed it right, you would not fear the light. Darren followed him with anxious eyes. You are misled, my lord. These girls twist things, they. Kale stopped behind the chair and spoke to Darren's back. I gave you responsibility. You used it to break the weakest. Under my roof, that is treason. The word hung there, heavy and final. Darren froze. Treason. His voice went high, almost squeaking. My lord, please, I have served you faithfully for years. I have balanced your books, negotiated your tithes, kept thieving hands from your coffers. You cannot. Treason, Kale repeated, is not only betrayal of coin, it is betrayal of trust. You betrayed mine. Worse, you betrayed those who could not fight you. He moved to stand in front of Darren again. The steward's knees buckled and he dropped down, hands clasped, eyes wide with terror now stripped of all dignity. Spare me, my lord, Darren begged. I will leave. I will go tonight. No one need know. The girl need never see me again. We can keep this between us. Kale almost laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. You would walk away quietly and carry this rot to another house, another set of frightened servants. He shook his head once. No, you have done your harm in silence long enough. Darren's lips trembled. Then what will you do? Kale's answer came slowly, each word pressed into place by his promise to Leora and by a part of himself that was tired of being only a creature of fear. You will not die tonight, he said. I will not stain this castle with your blood. You are not worth even that much of my rage. For a second, relief washed over Darren's features. Then Kale continued. At dawn, he said, you will stand in the great hall before every soul under this roof, guards, servants, scribes, everyone. I will tell them what you have done. I will ask you questions, and you will answer truthfully. If you lie, I will know. Your shame will not live in shadows anymore. It will stand in the light you so despise. Darren's mouth fell open. You would humiliate me, he whispered, as if that horror was somehow worse than death. I would remove the mask you used to hide your cruelty, Kale replied. I would break the power you built through fear. When I am done, you will never wield authority over another living soul again. You will leave these lands with nothing but the memory of the eyes that watched you fall. The steward shook his head wildly. Please, my lord, I beg you. Kale straightened, the decision final in his posture. Begging does not move me, he said. Remorse might have, but you have none. You are sorry only that you were caught. He called for guards. Two men entered, glancing between their pale-faced lord and the trembling steward. Take him, Kale ordered. He is no longer steward of my house. Confine him to the west guest room. No visitors, no letters. At dawn, bring him to the great hall. The guards obeyed at once. As they took hold of Darren's arms, firmly but without cruelty, the man twisted, trying to cling to his ledgers, his keys, anything that had once symbolized control. One by one, the objects slipped from his fingers and thudded to the floor. Tell them I served you well, he cried as they dragged him toward the door. Tell them I was loyal. Kale watched him go with eyes that had seen empires crumble. You served yourself, he said quietly, more to the empty room than to the man. Loyalty would never have left those bruises. The door closed, the chamber fell still. Alone at last, Kale let out a breath he had been holding since he first saw the marks on Leora's skin. The beast inside him was not satisfied. It wanted blood, final and simple. But another part of him, older than even his curse, felt something like relief. Not joy, not yet, but a step away from the man he had once been. He turned and left the room, his cloak whispering behind him. By the time he passed the library again, the castle was buzzing softly. Whispers followed him like smoke. The steward has been dismissed, some said. The lord himself went to his chamber, others murmured. Rumor traveled quicker than fire. Kale paused outside the library door. For a moment, his hand hovered over the handle. Tomorrow, he thought, would not only be a trial for Darren, it would be a test for Leora as well. To see her abuser stripped of power in front of everyone might free her. It might also reopen wounds still raw. Well, he had to give her a choice. He knocked once, then stepped inside. Leora rose at once, eyes wide, searching his face for answers. Is he? Oh, she could not finish the question. He lives, Kale said. For now, he is no longer steward here. He will never touch you again. A shudder of relief ran through her, so visible it almost broke his composure. Tears shimmered in her eyes, but they did not fall. She was holding herself together with sheer, stubborn will. Tomorrow at dawn, Kale continued gently, I will bring him before everyone in the great hall. I will strip away the lies he built. I will make sure they all see him for what he is and what he has done. No one will call you clumsy or ungrateful again. Leora's fingers tightened around the blanket. And must I be there? She whispered. He could have ordered it. He was lord. She was servant. But the man he had been before this night was already beginning to feel like a shadow he was stepping out of. No, Kale said, you must do nothing. You have already done enough. But if you wish, he hesitated, choosing the words with care. If you want to see that you are believed and that he is no longer above you, I will ask you to stand beside me, not below, beside. The idea seemed to stun her. A maid standing next to a vampire king while he judged his own steward. It sounded like something from the wildest stories the other girls whispered before sleep. I don't know if I am that brave, she said honestly. You were brave when you spoke his name, Cale replied. Everything after that is only walking forward. He left her with that thought and stepped back into the corridor, where the first gray hints of dawn were already touching the high windows. The castle stirred around him, restless with questions. When morning came, the great hall filled. Guards lined the walls. Servants crowded the back, whispering behind their hands. Scribes and minor nobles gathered in stiff little groups, casting curious glances toward the empty throne. Cale entered, cloak flowing behind him, and the room fell into a hush so complete they could hear the banners rustle in the draft. He took his place on the throne he had once claimed through fear alone. The doors at the far end of the hall opened. Guards led Darren inside, his fine clothes slightly rumpled, his face pale as chalk. Gasps rippled through the crowd. They had never seen him like this, not polished and untouchable, but small between two armored men. Cale's gaze swept the hall, then paused at the side entrance. Leora stood there, dressed in the same simple blue, her bruises faint now in the morning light but still there, still telling their own story. She hovered at the threshold, one foot inside, one out, frozen between running away and stepping forward. Their eyes met across the expanse of stone. In front of everyone, the vampire lord slowly extended his hand toward her, not as a command, but as an invitation. The entire hall seemed to hold its breath, every life in that room hanging on what the young maid would choose to do next. Leora's heart hammered so loudly she was sure the whole hall could hear it. The space between her and the throne felt impossibly long, like a bridge over a deep ravine. For a moment she thought about turning back, slipping out the side door, pretending she had never come. Then she saw the bruise still faint on her own wrist, remembered the weight of Darren's hand, the quiet of all the nights she had swallowed her voice, and the look in Lord Cale's eyes when he had knelt to meet her gaze. Oh, she stepped forward. The murmur of whispers swelled, then broke into stunned silence as she crossed the floor. No maid ever walked the center of the hall. That path was for nobles and warriors and for the monster on the throne. Yet here she was, dressed plain, hands trembling, moving like someone who had finally decided she was done walking in the shadows. Cale did not hurry her. He simply held his hand out, steady and waiting, as if there were nothing unusual at all in a king reaching down toward a servant. When she reached him, she stopped, looked at his hand for a heartbeat, then placed her own in it. His fingers closed gently around hers, cool and sure. A small, astonished sound went through the crowd, like air being drawn in all at once. Cale rose, bringing her with him so that she stood at his side, not behind him. He turned his gaze over the hall, his voice calm but carrying easily to the farthest corner. And today, he said, this hall will remember what kind of house it is. He let the words rest a moment, then continued. You have all feared me, some of you have hated me. I have done little to argue with those stories, but there is one fear I will not allow under my roof, the fear of being harmed by those who hold my trust. He looked toward Darren, who stood between the guards, chin lifted in an attempt at dignity that did not quite hide the panic in his eyes. This man, Cale said, was given authority in my name. He used it to frighten and hurt those who could not answer him. He thought my silence was permission. It was not. It was blindness. That failure is mine as well. The nobles shifted uncomfortably. It was not common to hear a lord say he had failed. The admission hung in the air like something fragile and rare. Cale felt Leora's fingers twitch in his hand as if his words had loosened something tight inside her. He drew a slow breath and went on. Today, we will not hide this in whispers. We will not tell each other quiet stories in kitchens and corridors while the harm continues. We will speak in the open under these banners under my name. He turned his attention fully to Darren. You are accused of using threats to keep your servants silent, of bruising their bodies to shape their fear, of touching lives that were placed in your care as if they were yours to break. Do you deny it, Darren? Dozens of eyes swung to the steward. He licked his lips, looking around as if searching for someone to rescue him. No one moved. My lord, he began, his voice cracking, you are being misled by a girl who resents discipline. I may have spoken harshly, yes, but these tales of cruelty are. Kale's eyes hardened and his tone cut through the lie before it could grow. You stand in front of every soul you have ruled, and still you reach first for excuses. Choose your next words with care. I will know if you lie. Darren faltered. For years he had wielded power through secrets. Now there were none. Every guard, every maid, every clerk watched him with a kind of quiet hunger for truth, for justice, for a sign that the world could be different from what it had been. Kale's hand tightened around Leora's just enough that she felt it. You may speak if you wish, he said softly, not turning his head, letting only her hear. Or you may remain silent. Either choice is brave. Her throat felt dry as old parchment. All her life she had been told to keep her voice small, to make herself easy to ignore. Now every ear in the hall waited. I don't know the right words, she whispered. Say the true ones, Kale answered. She drew a breath that shook and stepped forward half a pace, still close enough to feel the edge of his cloak brush her arm. When I was alone with him, she said, her voice thin at first, then growing stronger, he was not the man you see at your tables. If I was slow, he hurt me. If I spoke, he mocked me. If I cried, he told me I was weak. He made me afraid to sleep and afraid to wake. And when I thought about telling someone, he said no one would believe a girl who scrubs floors over a man who keeps the Lord's books. Her words dropped into the silence like stones in deep water. Faces in the crowd shifted. Some looked away, ashamed, as if realizing they had seen small signs and chosen not to ask. Leora's gaze found a few other maids near the back. One of them, the youngest, with kind eyes, was already crying quietly. Another nodded at her, a tiny, fierce motion that said, "Me too, I see you." Leora swallowed. I did not want him hurt, she finished. I just wanted him to stop. I wanted someone to say it was wrong. Kale's hand left hers just long enough to rest over his heart in a gesture halfway between vow and apology. It is wrong, he said, his voice deep and clear. What was done to you was wrong. What was done to any of you in my name was wrong. He looked back to Darren. Do you still call this discipline? Darren's shoulders sagged. The lies that had shielded him for so long had fallen away too quickly. He had nothing prepared to take their place. He opened his mouth, closed it again. When he finally spoke, the words were small. I may have been harsh, he muttered, but they needed to learn. If I was strict, it was for the good of your house. Kale descended the steps from his throne. Each footfall echoed. He stopped a few paces from Darren, close enough that the steward could feel the cold presence of him, the ancient weight of someone who had lived long enough to see this pattern repeated too many times. You used my house, Kale said, to feed your hunger for control. You made my name a weapon in hallways I did not walk. You will not speak of their good again. He turned to the crowd, his voice now made of iron and light. Listen well, power is not permission to harm. Fear is not the same as respect. In these walls, those who serve do so under my protection, not under my shadow. Any hand that forgets this will answer to me. He faced Darren again. You asked what I would do. This is my judgment. The hall held itself rigid, braced for the kind of fury that legends promised. A torn throat, a broken body, the harsh simplicity of violent justice. Instead, Kale's tone dropped into something quieter and more terrible. You will be stripped of your title. From this moment, you are no longer steward of this house, nor of any hall under my rule. You will sign over your holdings, your coin, your lands, your ledgers. They will be used to repair what you damaged, to care for those you made afraid to ask for help. Murmurs rose again. The small, tight hoard Darren had built from years of quiet cruelty was suddenly no longer his. You will leave my lands before the sun sets, Kale went on. You will carry a letter written in my hand that tells any lord who would hire you what you did here. You will never again stand where frightened hearts cannot challenge you. You will live, but never again with power over the weak. Darren shook his head, stunned. Exile, he breathed. Ruined, you might as well kill me. Kale's face was unreadable. Death is easy, he said. You do not deserve easy. You will walk with what you have done. You will see doors closed that once opened for you. And everywhere you go, you will know that the people you once frightened now speak your name without fear. He paused, then added, almost gently, "If someday you learn what remorse is, you may yet find a life worth living, but it will not be built on broken backs." The words landed not only on Darren, but on everyone listening. A warning and a strange kind of mercy wrapped together. Mikhail turned to the guards. "See that he is escorted out of my borders by nightfall. He is to be given a cloak, food, and nothing else." Darren looked once wildly around the hall for sympathy for Alliance. He found none. Even those who had once laughed at his jokes now stood rigid, unwilling to meet his eye. The guards led him away. The great doors opened, and the man who had ruled the servants with whispers and threats was marched through the same space they used each morning to carry in bread. When the doors closed behind him, the hall remained quiet, the kind of silence that comes after a storm that has changed the shape of the land. Mikhail returned to his throne but did not sit. He addressed the room again, his voice softer now but no less steady. "This house will not forget this day," he said. "From now on, if you are harmed by someone with power, you may speak, not only to them but to me, to the guard at your door, to the steward who replaces him, but know this, the first duty of any who laid here is protection, not fear." His gaze swept over the servants, pausing on faces he had barely noticed before. "I have been far from your halls and your beds and your kitchens. I will not be so distant again." He looked to one side of the gathering where an older clerk with kind eyes stood clutching a stack of papers. "Master Halen," Cale called, "you will serve as steward until I appoint another. Your ledgers are honest, your voice is gentle, and I have never seen a bruise on a wrist from your hand." The man startled, then bowed deeply, eyes shining with a mixture of fear and gratitude. "I will do my best, my lord." "That is all I ask," Cale said, "your best and your kindness." He glanced at Leora, still by his side, her cheeks flushed, her eyes bright with too many feelings to name. "As for you," he said in a more private tone meant only for her, though those nearest could hear, "if you wish, you may return to your duties as before, or you may take another place, one less lonely." She blinked in surprise. Another place.